Hi everybody. So today we are dealing with RTX 3080 Ti Thunder Edition. So this is a reference model from NVIDIA. I got that GPU from somebody who sent it to me. So it has no pads on it. It has some issues. It's a little bit banged up. So this is definitely this has definitely been used before. You can see some of the covers are missing. Some of the screws have been replaced with different screws. Some of the cover, something is missing. Some of the plates have been slightly damaged. So I do know this is a little bit of a banged up GPU. Nevertheless, I got the temperatures of that GPU with the pads that were in place before. So we would still be able to see the difference in temperature, if any. And the reason why I removed the pad was I wanted to make sure that everything on the GPU otherwise seems to be working before really spending time replacing the pads and doing a video about it. So that being said, what we're using today, the purpose is this is a new set that we are offering. So I want just to explain how it works. Because it's a little bit different than the other sets we're using. So anyways, this is what it looks like when you take out of the box. So it has multiple pieces. And so if you pay attention, the first thing you can remark is that, the VRAM pad you have 4 of them. And this is a 3080, so there are, memory modules only in the front. But those pads, some of them are 1.5 millimeters, some of them are only 0.4 millimeters. The reason for that is because NVIDIA somehow at some time last year in 2021, last year was, in the second half of the year, they changed the specifications, manufacturing specification on those GPUs, which basically resulted to the clearance between the VRAM and the cooler to become different. But they did not, provide any information about it. So if you look around into the forums, some people, have good success with 1.5 millimeters. Some people say they have 2 millimeters. People argue, it's all over the place. The reason is simply because there has been changes in the manufacturing tolerances, which makes it a nightmare to know ahead of time what thickness you'll need before you open your GPU. So that's really far from ideal. You can blame it on NVIDIA. So what we've been doing there is basically we have different pieces, and depending on what the GPU looks like, you're going to use 1 or 2 pieces stacked together. And I'll explain a little bit more about the process and how you should go about it. So, but before we do that, let's open it up. Let's look at the GPU from within to see what it looks like. So here, there's an easy way. People have been struggling to remove this magnetic cover. So what I do, I just take a sharp blade, which I can just put, on the side and just gently lift it. And that is just that simple. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Of course, you would have more cover there if they were not missing. So here, the cover that would go there, what you will need to do is to lift it from the center, and then you have 2, small things that goes in there. So if you lift it from there, then you can just wiggle it out. It's not very complicated. So the process will be the same on the 3080 and 3090. Although the 3090 has a slightly different pad arrangement, but the process to open up a 3090 FE is basically the same. It's just a slightly different PCB. So that's the back plate coming right out. So in theory, what you would see if it was not already cleaned up and removed, you will have a square of pad, soft pad on the TI model that goes right there, or that would be stuck on that side. This would not be included in the set we are using because it's pretty much unnecessary, so I would recommend that you keep it. on the 3080, the non-TI, you don't have that piece of pad, and then you'll have another stripe there and there that you would clean up. So the connectors for NVIDIA are different from everybody else. So they are of a different type. So you need to know how to disconnect them. So you have these two there, which are ribbon cable, and you have this one, which is just a lock type. So this one, what you do, you need to slide the gray area to the opposite side, like that. And then the cable, you need to go slightly underneath and just lift it up. So you pull it up, and it's popping right out. So for these two, the process is identical between these two. You have a small lever you need to raise up. Once it's up, it means it's unlocked. And then what you can just do is go underneath the ribbon cable and just gently wiggle it out. Those are quite sensitive cables, so be careful to not pull on them too much. So let's do the same on that one. And I don't know how nicely you can see it, but you can see that people who worked on that GPU before seems to have slightly damaged this cable. It is still functional, but it's not really ideal. I mean, this one is going to start failing if we keep yanking on it. So next, we'll have to remove the I/O plate because it's holding the PCB into the heatsink. So you have to remove the 4 screws. And then remove the 4 screws which are holding the core together. Same thing, you can see that those screws start being a little bit stripped. So make sure you use the correct bit. This is a T6. Alright, so if you have disconnected everything, this should come off. It's probably going to be stuck, and the pads are going to be sucking things together. So you have to probably, from my experience with the 3080s and 3090s, 3080 Ti's FE, like you have to wiggle it a little bit out, and little by little it's going to come off. So here, obviously, it's already clean. So you'll have the VRAM pads going there. You'll have pads for the MOSFETs, but for instance, on that GPU, you don't have any pads for the VRAM. And this is coming from NVIDIA, so you'll assume that NVIDIA knows what they are doing. But so we're not going to replace anything there. There's nothing to connect to. So now, this is where the discussion really kicks in. So if you look at the back of the cooler, you see numbers and you see a marking right there. So we try to collect information from many people, and so we got in our database over 50 inputs, and we kind of stopped there because finding a pattern was a bit complicated. So first, if you see SV3 there, this is nearly guaranteed. This is one of the newer model that would require 1.5 millimeter on the VRAM. So SV3 is nearly a sure mark of this is a newer cooler. However, if you don't have a SV3, if there's nothing there, it doesn't mean it's not a newer one. It could still be. So you see the manufacturing date, right there. This is a lower line. Let's see if you can see it. So it tells you when it's manufactured, at least when the cooler was. The issue there is like NVIDIA is not willing to provide any information as to when they changed it. And if you look also on the sticker QR code, you have a part number. So this is a part number for the cooler. So based on the part cooler, we were able to cross-check, and you also have another part number right there. we find basically a trend or a pattern where, all of those which have the same number, they kind of use the same thicknesses. So we can kind of tell based on that. The challenge is between the 3080 Ti, and obviously 3090. Those numbers are sometimes shared, sometimes not, and it doesn't always point to the same things. So it's a little bit tricky to just say, okay, based on those numbers, this is what we have. The only thing we know almost for sure, like the SV3 marking, is indicative of this is a newer model, so this is where you need 1.5. So not being able to tell exactly just from numbers or from the looks of it or from NVIDIA's input, whether you need 1.5 millimeter or 1.8, 1.9 millimeter, this is what we did. Okay, so let's look at the pads. Let's see how we can open that up. So here, simple enough, the black pads will go on the back of the PCB, and we will do that at the end. So those will go there, and we'll take care of that in the end. You have stripes going there, so black in that case covers the back, so that should be simple enough. So now let's focus on the front. So let's forget, or let's start with the obvious ones. This one's going to cover that, and that one's going to cover that. Okay, and then we have a small one. I'll have to double check, but my recollection is covering one of the modules in one of the corners. I'll check my notes and we'll put it where it pertains. But now let's take everything else. So those are all the VRAM pads. And so they go kind of 2 by 2. If you take the one that's intended for the 3 modules, you have, as you can see, a thick one that's 1.5 millimeter, and you have a thin one that's around 0.4 millimeters, so relatively thin. If you have a newer model, so if you have SV3 marking, or if you do not know, if you're not sure, what you'll have to do is start with just putting the thick piece in place. Doing everything else, keep aside the very thin ones for now, put everything back together, put the paste, close it up, and try to do that, and hook it up, let it run, see if your memory temperatures are bad. If they're really high, meaning, if you start mining or gaming and they reach 110 degrees or so quickly or right away, and that your core temperatures are very low, it means they are probably too thin because you likely have one of the older model of FE. So what you'll want to do is to reopen the GPU and then add on top of this, the other piece, the thin piece you've left. So it's absolutely okay to have a layer of 2 pads together. It's not going to be an issue on the performance, and this way you can achieve either 1.5 if you have a newer model and that's what you need. If you happen to have an older model, then you'll be able to go to 1.9, which is what we had originally in our previous FE set. Okay, but unless you know for sure you have one of the older FE, we do not recommend that you go straight up to piling things up the first time, because if you do that, you're going to squish them together, and it's not going to be possible to take them apart anymore if you end up needing only 1.5 millimeter. If you don't want to, so first, there's no issue with running the GPU for a little bit of time, even if you have thermal throttling from the VRAM. You can run it like that for hours or days. It's not ideal. We're not taking any responsibility for it, but we've done it with no issue for way longer than that. So it's not a major concern if you do it just for a few minutes or even for an hour for testing. If you really don't want to do that, the only other way you can do it is, you start with a 1.5 millimeter in place, you close it back up, you make sure everything is tight and well, you squeeze it a little bit together to make sure there's good contact, and you reopen it up. When you open it up, If the pads are clearly sticking on the PCB side where you will have put them first, and you don't see any marking, on the back of the pads or any, maybe slightly oily residue on those areas right there, then it means there was no contact between those pads and the cooler, which basically means, the pads were too thin, and then you can go ahead and add, the additional zero 0.4 millimeters. In that case, we know it's a SV3, we know it's a newer model, so the 1.5 millimeter should work right away. We should not need to reopen it and put this one back in, so we're not going to just, add those, but so those will not be used for that particular model. Again, if you have one of the older model, you'll have to figure that out, and then you'll have to use, this additional piece on top of this. I do understand it's a little bit convoluted. Unfortunately, this is not our doing. This is not the way we like it. We're just trying to provide you the information as we think we know it, and then it's up to you to make it a fit. Okay, so after checking, my notes, this one is going to go right there. So let's put those pads in. Close, put the PCB back on the cooler, and then we can put the pads on the back of the PCB. So here, all the pads are 1.5 millimeter. So this one, I've just repositioned it a little bit closer from, that square. The reason is because I know the cooler is going to come very close from it, and so if it's too off center, then it's going to get in the way, and either damage the pad or prevent it from closing nicely. There you go. Let's put a little bit of thermal paste. So using SYY, it's affordable and good enough paste. We strongly recommend to actually spread the paste over the core to make sure you have a thin and even layer. So in that case, you can see we clearly had put too much paste, so we don't need to keep all of that on the core. Okay, so the one step you are noting in the video is before putting the pad, you will have to clean up the GPU. If you want to see what's being done, just look at any other of our videos. We do that for every GPU, just in that case, it was already clean before the video. Okay. So the one thing you want to be careful when you flip it around is sure that the pads are not falling off, but also in that case you want to make sure that the connectors come on the other side of the PCB where you'll have to connect them. So let's go slowly. Everything seems to be sticking to the PCB just nicely. We have one connector, second one, there. And that's it. So in order to keep the PCB from moving relative to the cooler, I'm going to first put that X bracket back in place. As you surely know, just set the screws lightly initially. Do not tighten up any one corner until all 4 screws have been set, and then you can just go around and give it a few turns at a time. Okay, so let's put all these connectors back in place. So here we just push it in and then slide the cover. Here, make sure that the bracket, the lever is still up, and then insert the ribbon cable inside the connector, and then you can drop the lever, and then that should stay in place. You have a white line that basically shows you if this has been inserted or not. This one might be a bit more tricky. There you go. And drop the lever, and this is secured in place. Okay. So now, oops. Like explained before, the green pad left, the very thin one, are not going to be used because this is one of the newer models. But what we have now are these black pads, which are meant for the back of the PCB. So the two unique shape black pads, they are going there and there. They are identical, so it doesn't matter which goes on the top and bottom. Then what you have this stripe that goes, I believe, on that end, right there. So it's not covering this module; it just goes in there. And then you have two small squares that are just going to cover that area and that area. And like I said, you should keep the original pad as a big rectangle on the 3080 Ti's that cover that area. Keep it. If you discard it, if you already discarded it, too bad. It's not going to be any major issue that you don't have anything on there. Okay. So don't worry too much about it. Otherwise, just find whatever pad thickness you need. That's likely going to be 1 millimeter or 0.5 millimeter, and just cut a piece yourself. But you will not see any temperature difference coming from that. Okay, so we've put all the pads that we need to put in place. What you've seen me do is push on those pads to just make sure they go well in between the module. You have a number of raised modules, and so I just like to make sure that the pad goes well around so that it has to cover some of the soldering points there and there. So that's it. Before we put the backplate, we need to make sure we put the I/O plate in position. Alright, so we've put the screws back in place, these four. As you can see, I've just dropped the pad. The only one I did not push on, did not stick because there's no surface, no contact on anything. So let's take care of that. There you go. And now we can put the back plate in place. Obviously, you need to make sure it's clean, but then you can just put it back in place. So for the magnetic cover, you should have just one that's kind of rounded. So that's the one that goes in the corner. And all the other ones will be straight, so they can go into any of the other spots. So as explained at the beginning of the video, here we are missing quite a few bits and pieces of that GPU, but nothing that's essential to its functioning. So that's it. So this video was a bit unique in the sense where it was not a traditional open, clean, put new parts and close it back. There was a bit more discussion on, the thickness of the parts between the newer and older version of the FE, both, and this applies for the 3080 Ti, 3080, and 3090. The issues are very similar. So if you have a newer unit and listen to what was said during that video, you will want to use 1.5 millimeters on the VRAM. If you have one of the older units, which I think was before Q3 2021, then you'll have to use 1.8, 1.9 millimeters. Sometimes 2 millimeter works well as well. So what we have in the set we use, there are two layers of pads. One is 1.5 and the other one that we have left over 0.4. So you can use a 1.5 if you have a newer model like this one was. And then if you have one of the older models, you can put 1.5 plus 0.4. That's going to put you at 1.9. And that should get you sorted out. So this is it. We'll test the temperatures with the pads, making sure everything is fine, and we'll post the results. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any questions.